I've had a number of requests for a video on how I digitize my vintage patterns. So I'm going to walk through the process and hopefully this will be helpful to some of you. I'm starting out with my portable digitizer board. This is a CalComp RollUp 3 that I bought used about 10 years ago. It is connected to my computer via cable, and it comes with a puck that has a number of numbers on it. I use a pattern drafting software, and my software has a guide for what these numbers mean when I press them and how they're translated into the software. So I'm going to trace around the outside of the pattern, and it's going to be recreated in my software on my computer. So I'm going to take my pattern piece here, I'm laying it out on the digitizer with the straight grain on one of the horizontal lines. In this case, I am going to trace around the outer line on this pattern and not around the seam line. I will add the seam allowance in once the pattern has been transferred into my software, and I'll show you how to do that. So I've got my pattern laid out. I'm going to take my puck and I'm going to place it at the corner where I'm going to start and add a boundary point. And then I'm going to move on to the notch. I'm going to mark my notch. I'm going to mark the outer edge and the inner edge. And then I'm moving to another corner. And I'm going to go down along this curve, adding a curve point every couple of inches to recreate the curve in my software. I'm going to put a boundary point at the corner and at this corner. And I'm going to move up to here and do another notch outside and inside, and then the boundary point, and then add my curve points in. The notch, and continue on with the curve, and putting my last point about a quarter of an inch from where I started. And then the next step, I'm going to add my straight grain marking. So I'm going to put my grain line in, and then finish off by marking the end of the pattern. And as you can see, the pattern has been recreated in my software. So now that it's in the software, I'm going to true it up and add the seam allowance, and then we'll be ready to use it. Now that the pattern piece has been transferred into the software, I'm going to true it up and make it usable. So I'm going to move it up here so I can see it a little better. The first thing I'm going to do is to straighten out all of my lines. So I'm going to take this side and make sure it's aligned horizontally, and then this one as well is aligned vertically. So I've done those. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my notches and my curves and true them up if they need to be. This notch looks good. This notch is maybe a little funky, so I'm going to move it out a bit. And in this case, and this is actually just because I know that this notch is just marking the seam allowance, and it is not necessary, and it's going to mess up when I put a seam allowance in. So in this case, I'm going to delete this notch because I know that I don't need it. Now I'm looking at this curve and thinking, it doesn't quite look right. So I'm going to just go in and edit the curve a bit till it looks a little like what I'd like. A little smoother. And that looks nice. And then I might want to clean this one up just a bit. Until I feel like it's nice and smooth. And you know, you don't always do a great job following along, so you might need to clean up. Now that I've cleaned this up, I think my pattern looks good. I'm going to go and add some seam allowance. So in this case, as you recall, I used the outside of the pattern, so I'm going to add the seam allowance inside the perimeter. This pattern has 5/8 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to say I included that when I designed the pattern. And click on there, and now my seam allowance is on the pattern. In addition, I know that the hem actually is 2.5 inches on this pattern. So I'm going to change that to 2.5 inches so that it matches the pattern. Now I can just rename this. And the pattern is ready to use. I will do this for all of the patterns in this garment, and I'm going to show you. I've already done that. So you can see here is my jacket pattern. I have already scanned all of these pattern pieces in. I also have done the skirt pattern. In this case, I created a right and left back because there was a cutaway for the right back, and rather than marking the cutaway and having a cutaway on this piece, I thought it was easier to do 2 separate pieces. So I've created a left back and a right back, even though that wasn't in the original pattern. I also, because I thought it would be easier, I created lining pieces that are different than what was in the pattern. In the pattern, there was a cut lining to this line marking, and instead I drafted a pattern to that line so that I had standalone lining pieces. And all of these pieces will end up as my finished garment. So hopefully this was really helpful for you. And if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.